And we are going to get rolling here. So for those of you who are new to the idea of iridology, welcome. I am happy that I get to be one of your first teachers. Those of you who are more experienced in iridology, I'm glad to help you continue your education here. We need to consider some things just as we're warming up here that, get rid of that iridology has been evolving for nearly 200 years, and our understanding of iridology has undergone massive changes, and research has moved us forward, at least those of us who have chosen to keep up with the times. Now, somehow in that forward movement, old language has persisted, and that means old understandings have persisted. The old names are often misleading, and they actually reflect a lack of understanding, but they are still widely used, which only adds to the confusion. If you've been on any of the YouTube channels that are about iridology, and if you hop from one channel to another with different instructors, you will find there is a lot of confusion because people have not kept up with the research. So this little tutorial today is all about getting current. This is all about how to use iridology properly and how to get the best results from doing it. In the holistic world, unless you are a naturopath or a medical doctor, and actually even in some places, even a naturopath can't do this, the rest of us aren't allowed to diagnose. And when we're doing iridology in the old way, we were often diagnosing. So we need to avoid that because diagnosing is a great way to get in trouble. We also want to avoid prescribing. So because if we're diagnosing, then any recommendations we make are considered to be a prescription. And when we give recommendations based on a disease name, diagnosing is naming a disease. If we've made a mistake in naming the disease and we've hinged all of our recommendations on that disease name, then our therapies are going to be wrong. So the wrong diagnosis means the wrong treatment. You will notice that the old language, as we talk about it today, was very diagnostic in an error, and it's just an error-riddled way of working because, again, that bad diagnosis means bad therapy. The new language instead is very descriptive. And when you understand the description and when you understand anatomy and physiology, it makes it so much easier to give good recommendations. So just before we launch into our discussion of languages, I'm asking your permission to bear with me for just a moment while I introduce the upcoming course. And this is going to take just a couple of minutes. Confident Nutritionist, the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System, is the only live, online, fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. I find so many holistic practitioners spend their time with their clients, but then they spend more time when they're not being paid for their time, creating protocols for their clients. And in doing that, they often give their clients way too much information, and it destroys the client's ability to be successful. Hello, please print clearly. Thank you for joining us on Instagram. So by learning this style of iridology, it's going to help you stop working unpaid overtime creating client programs. It's going to help you stop overwhelming your clients. It's going to help you to create clients that will be, programs that your clients will be able to follow, which will lead to their increased success, and it will lead to them becoming long-term clients. I have many clients who have been with me for 38 years. And it's not that they come back every month forever. As they're in for 4 or 5 appointments, we get them on the right track. They go and they do their own thing for a few years, and as they age, their body shifts, then they come back, and we repeat the process to update what they need to know for where they're at. And so I invite you to be aware of that fact, that when we create programs in the wrong way, we don't do our clients any favors. We need to create programs that our clients can actually follow. Does that make sense? That they're actually manageable. So if you are a herbalist or a nutrition coach or a naturopath, I hope you will consider joining me for the course, and I'll give you a little more information here. The goal of the program is to teach you constitutional iridology and how to integrate it so that you can confidently use the nutrition you know, the herbology you know, the other therapies and protocols you know, to create doable programs for your clients during your client sessions, not on your own time, but actually when you're with your client. The next course is starting on Wednesday, October 7th. And if you would like to join me for an info session, which will be happening on Wednesday, September 30th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, either text me your address, DM me your address, PM me your address, get your email address to me in some way so that I can send you the link to join us for that webinar. I'm inviting you specifically to join me to learn not just about the course, but to also learn 4 key things that you can start doing right now that will make your client sessions more effective, that will help you to laser in on your client's needs more effectively, that will make you a better practitioner, better than you already are. I know that's hard to believe it could happen, right? But better than you already are. And that will also help you to do more good for your clients. So if you are interested in that, again, just make sure you PM me or DM me your email address. If you already have been following me for a while and you know you want to join me for the course, then I'm inviting you to join me or to book a little phone call with me. This isn't a sales call. This isn't a high pressure, you got to take this course call. This is actually a call to isolate, to identify whether this program is actually really for you. So for those of you who are joining me on the webinar, I just posted that link in your chat. Those of you who are with me on Instagram, there you go, calendly.com/dynamic-iridology/insight-call. And if you're with me on Facebook, you have access to that very same link. And so, and if you're with me on Facebook, just PM me your email address and I'll send that link to you if you would like to have a chat with me to talk about whether this course is actually a good fit for you. I only want students in the program who it's a good fit for, right? I want them to have the best learning experience possible. All right, let's talk about the language now. You ready? You ready to look at the language? The definition of lesion, we're going to start with lesion and lacuna. So lesion is the old word, lacuna is the new word. The definition of lesion is a region or organ or tissue which has suffered damage through injury or disease, such as a wound, ulcer, abscess, or tumor. The up-to-date understanding is that, oh, and when we talk about lesions, there was also the understanding that with a lesion, the shape and the size of the lesion would change and that lines would appear inside it when healing was happening. The up-to-date understanding is that the lay of the iris fiber does not change as a result of trauma. And I did a full webinar live event on this topic earlier this week about what changes would you see with a broken bone and with surgery and things like that. A lacuna, on the other hand, simply means an unfilled space or gap. So it's just a shape in the eye that is usually petal-shaped or leaf-shaped. Sometimes it has interesting fiber inside it that gives us more information, but the shape of this is not going to change based on diet or supplements or cleansing or anything we do. This brings, the lacuna brings our attention to a reaction field in the iris, but it does not tell us what is wrong there. We know that lacunae are inherited markings, as are most of the markings we see in an iris. These lacunae are passed down from the last 3 to 4 generations typically. So when we see a lacuna, we actually need to have a conversation with the client to understand the family health history, to understand this person's health history. We need to understand who has had problems in these areas, and does our client have a problem in this area? We also need to understand what our client is currently doing for their health. They may be fully aware that there is an inherent issue, that everybody in the family has problems with X, Y, and Z. So this client may be doing all of the right dietary, all of the right supplement, all of the right lifestyle things to actually keep the problem under control. So they may not actually have any problems or symptoms in that area. When we see an eye like the one we're looking at on the screen right now, it's important for us to remember that each and every lacuna is not necessarily important. What may be more important here is how these lacuna play together. What does one mean individually is one thing. What they mean collectively can be another thing. So we need to have that context. And again, it must be remembered, what is the client already doing to help themselves? Or do they just naturally have they created a really healthy lifestyle that is controlling everything, that is actually building integrity in their body, so that if they are young enough to be of childbearing age, that what they pass on to their children is stronger and better? It's an important conversation to have. So we never look at an eye and go, oh my goodness, you have a problem, you have a problem, you have a problem. It's more, is there a personal or family history of? How do these symptoms show up in your body? What are you already doing? And what else can you do? This, in former days, used to be called a sodium ring or a cholesterol ring. We now call this, this is actually technically a corneal annulus, but it falls under the umbrella of lipemic diathesis. So there is some minor correlation between this white ring that builds over time in some people and the hardening of the arteries and elevated cholesterol, but it's not a strong correlation. And so we can't look at this and say, oh my goodness, your cholesterol is off the charts, you are absolutely blocking arteries. It's not quite a one-to-one correlation. This ring, if it is all the way around, is an annulus, a corneal annulus. This is actually in the cornea, not in the iris itself. If this was only part of the way around, it would be a corneal arcus. This is also described as corneal opacity. So those are all modern current terms. They all fall under the umbrella of lipemic diathesis. So the first terms, corneal arcus, corneal annulus, corneal opacity, are describing what we're looking at. Lipemic diathesis gives us an understanding of the chemistry here. And when we call this, when we see this and give it any of those names, depending on what it looks like, and we know it's a lipemic diathesis marker, then we are going to ask questions about how does the liver function. This is a suggestion that the liver may not be efficiently processing carbohydrates, which may lead to elevated triglycerides. Elevated cholesterol can also be a suggestion of issues with blood sugar. So it's not hard and fast that this correlates to hardening of the arteries and elevated cholesterol. You will see a lot of people call these nerve rings or stress rings, these lines that go around and around and around. These are not the result of stress. They will not go away when the stress goes away. You cannot take enough supplements to actually erase them, because these are crinkles in the fibers in the iris. We call them contraction furrows because what happens is when the iris tissue is contracted, as happens if the pupil gets big, these are the places where the fibers would naturally crease or crinkle. If you're taking a fiber this long and you're trying to fit it into here, something's got to give, because these fibers don't actually telescope, but instead they crinkle. They get little wrinkles in them so they can compress into a smaller space. These are an indicator that this person inherently is programmed to always be ready for the next crisis. We call that living in the sympathetic response zone. So if you're familiar with the nervous system, you know that the sympathetic system is the system that kicks in when you are under stress. When there's been a sudden surprise or a shock or a trauma, it is the sympathetic zone that gives you all of the neurotransmitters to either fight, flee, or freeze, right? And so this says that this person tends to always live on that edge of being ready for the next major crisis to happen. And in some cases, it's not even a major crisis, it's a hiccup, but they respond as if it's a crisis. These rings are much more apparent when the pupil is largely dilated, because again, the tissue in what we know as the humeral and ciliary zones gets compressed into a smaller area. So this person, what this teaches us about this person is they probably have a lifelong need for an extra amount of B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium. They need to have foods that support the nervous system in order to properly nourish the nervous system so they can properly filter the events that are happening to decide whether this event needs a big response or a little response or can be completely ignored. Does that make sense? Is that making sense to you? That this is not about someone who has a lot of stress in their life, but it is someone who responds typically very strongly to stress. And therefore, they need the right kind of nutritional support to help mitigate those responses. Venous congestion versus circulatory ring. So when we look at the iris here, you can see that there is a little bit of a bluish, purplish haze hanging off the edge of the iris. So this is actually in the sclera margin. Now, this is not always an indication that the circulation in the veins is poor. I see it in my practice, and I've seen this as a much stronger correlation to blood sugar imbalances, to tired adrenal glands, and to the impact those two things have on the circulation. So when someone has really low blood sugars, the body cuts off circulation to the extremities to save that fuel for the core organs, the important organs like the brain and the heart and the liver and the kidneys. If the adrenal glands are tired, they may also not be regulating vasoconstriction properly, and it's highly likely they're going to vasoconstrict the extremities a lot more. And so when I see this, I know that there may be poor circulation, but not because the circulation itself is poor, more that the circulation is usually a symptom of something else that's out of balance. And hence, I don't give a circulatory supplement. I ask questions about blood sugars. I ask questions about symptoms that would point us towards adrenal insufficiencies. And we work on those because that will 9 times out of 10 warm this person up. Although remember, this marker is not going to go away. The idea of iridology and supplements and diet is not to change the eyes and what we see in the eyes, because that's changing the genetic structure. It is to improve the person's health. Right, when we see in this eye, you can see that we've got some of these lines radiating outwards. These are often called parasite lines or radii solaris. Now, those are outdated, and the modern term is radial furrows, because these, again, do not say you've got parasites. They do not say that you definitely hold toxicity. These are actually separations, literally separations. If your eye is made up of fibers that are laying like this, these are separations between the fiber, where we are now able to look deeper into the stroma of the iris. So when we see this, it does suggest some issues where there may be some weakness in the tissue of the organ that is sitting in this area. This also does suggest that there may be even, these add power rather to contraction furrows. So if we see contraction furrows and we see radial furrows, we then understand that there is a more intense nervous system response to stress. We need to remember that we can't call these parasite lines because what we're looking at in the irides is inherent. It's about your DNA structure. It's about what your brain knows about how your body is put together. And when you have a parasite, that doesn't change your DNA. So it's not going to change your eyes. Does that make sense? Parasite doesn't change your eyes. Your eyes only show us what your DNA knows, what your brain knows. It doesn't teach us what the transient changes that happen in our body. These are often called by other people drug spots or sora, and people will attribute various things like heavy metal toxicity or drug toxicity to when they see this or when they see various pigments in the eye. We instead call these particular markings pigments. They're just pigments. Now, what I've noticed, and I don't know exactly where you necessarily live, but I think we've got people from all over the world with us on the webinar right now, which is ultra cool. But when we see these, we need to be aware that it doesn't mean the person needs a cleanse. North Americans are cleanse happy. They seem to wear it as a badge of honor. I'm on a cleanse, I'm doing a fast. And it's like, wouldn't it be better just to get it together and have a healthy lifestyle so you don't need to do a cleanse or a fast? It would be so much smarter to not let stuff build up and to not go through that labor-intensive, energy-intensive process of doing a cleanse, because most people don't do cleanses right anyways. So, having said that, there has been no scientific proof that these areas of pigment are the result of chemical drug use or chemical exposure or toxicity. There is no proof that these pigments can be cleansed out of the eyes, but we do know that these pigments can accumulate. The irides accumulate pigment, they don't disperse it. And so over time, we might see more pigment accumulate, which gives us an indication, gives us clues as to what may be inherently programmed to be going out of balance, but we cannot get rid of the pigment, right? So we monitor the pigment every year or two just to keep on top of how is the body changing as it gets older. What is the genetic programming this body has for aging? Now, those of you on Instagram, I'm going to move my camera a little bit closer for this one so you can see this more clearly. There we go. Do you see that right here at the inner edge of the iris, there's this little bit of a gray band right in here? Can you see that? That used to be called an absorption ring. An absorption ring. Has nothing to do with absorbing anything. It is now called a gray interpupillary border. So this area of the eye is the IPB, or the interpupillary border, and when it's gray, we just add gray to it. And this is actually the correct ophthalmological name for the part we are looking at. This is actually, an ophthalmologist would call this an interpupillary border. This correlates to the lining of the stomach. And it teaches us about the stomach's inherent ability to secrete digestive juices. When it is gray, and that is an inherent marking, it's been there all along, it suggests this person genetically is programmed to not secrete digestive juices at the stomach level as well as we would like them to. Now, does that affect absorption ultimately? Yes, it does. Because remember, the stomach is about digesting protein. If the person is not able to break the proteins down well enough into amino acids, then they're not going to absorb the individual amino acids properly, because they're not getting the individuals, they're getting chains of amino acids that when they get absorbed into the bloodstream are ineffective. They're not useful. Right, so it does have to do with absorption, sort of, but it has a lot more to do, and that's down the chain, down the road, has more to do with actually the stomach, how it's programmed to function. And, you know, when we see this, we know what to do with it. We know what dietary recommendations to make. We know what kinds of supplements and lifestyle things to suggest to help this person's stomach function more optimally. Right? And that's important. That's why we're doing this. We're not doing it to see if we can change this to a nice shade of blue. We're doing this to improve the person's digestion. A rheumatic eye versus a febrile eye. Now, once again, for those of you on Instagram, let's get closer. There we go. There we go. So when we see this is a blue eye, and it's got a lot of white in it, a lot of really hyper white. It's almost a white eye. That used to be called a rheumatic eye. Now, when you think of a rheumatic eye, what does it make you think of? It makes me think that someone's had rheumatic fever or something like that, right? That's not what this is all about at all. This is now called a febrile eye. Now, that suggests that this is a person who, particularly as a child, but maybe even as an adult, fevered very easily as their first line of immune defense. So when we see this, again, this person needs to be coached with their nutrition to support their immune system, but we're not going to break that pattern of fevering because fever is an important part of the immune response. So this is just a tip-off that this person is prone to fevering more easily. And again, we know what kind of dietary things we can do to support the immune system to help them not need to fever so aggressively. Does that make sense? Right, so we're not going to say they've got a rheumatic eye. I mean, my goodness, how would that feel for someone to say, you have a rheumatic eye? It's not even, we need to keep what we're doing on a level that is either not emotionally charged or positive, right? Because we know that health is not helped by negativity. We used to call this a weak constitution when we would see this many lacunae open and closed and the wobbly fiber structure and little gaps between things. We used to call that a weak constitution. Would that just make your day? To have someone say to you, you've got a weak constitution, like, great, hopeless, I can't do anything about this, right? Because we know we can't change fiber structure. We now call this instead a connective tissue subtype. So in reality, whether your fibers are densely packed and fairly straight or wavy and woven and gappy, it shows your predisposition to things, not your actual condition. So when we see this is a person who is likely more prone to some structural issues, to their tissues, their body not holding together quite as well as we'd like it to. Are there things we can coach them on to help with that? Yeah, there absolutely are. I've worked with clients, well, this is one of my clients, who have had eyes like this, and they displayed no weakness at all because they'd already learned at a young age to give their bodies what they needed to be well. In modern constitutional iridology, again, this is a connective tissue subtype. This person is going to have to be more diligent with their nutrition on an ongoing basis in order to maintain their body structure well and protect their health. Is there anything wrong with doing that? Not at all. And so when we see this, when I see this, my question to the person is, do you have a history, or is there a family history of a predisposition towards strains or breaks, bone breaks, or easily misaligning the spine or a joint? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Or you might ask, is there a history of people in your family aging prematurely, looking old before their time? And the answer is probably yes. That's all we need to hear, because from there we know how to coach them with their diet and their supplements to keep the structure of their body strong. We used to call this a strong constitution. Do you see the difference in the fiber structure between this and the last eye? And we now call this a neurogenic subtype. So the strong constitution from the old language would have shown up as neatly organized, densely packed fibers, just like you're looking at here. Really almost looks like the fibers have been combed. But we are calling this neurogenic. Now, the reason we do that is because this person, their body is very resilient. They often don't learn the lessons of health while they're young because their body is so resilient. They can party hard, they can eat junk food, they can be really hard on their body. And their body will put up with it for a number of years. And when they're in their 40s, they start coming in to see me going, I don't get it. I've never been sick a day in my life. And so the fact that their body is more resilient, but they didn't take care of it, means means that they've destroyed the resiliency to a certain level. And so these people need to learn when they're young, just as well as everybody else does, how to take care of their bodies. But these people also like to have everything be just so. They crave peace, they crave calm. And that's why we call them neurogenic. They like to be in control of things, and they know how the world should work. And if we would all just do it their way, everybody would be fine. Do you know anybody like that? I know a few people like that. Yeah, and it's fun because I understand them on that level. And that means that I understand how much to give them to keep them calm. And I understand what's important to give them and what's not important. Right? And so when we're working with our clients, again, we need to be very careful with them that we don't give them too much homework, because they will stress over trying to do all of it. We need to give them little pieces of homework that they can be really successful with and build on those successes. Is that making sense? Bowel pockets versus crypts. Again, for my Instagram friends, let's come closer. So we're looking at things like this, sitting inside the Cholerate. These little dark spots. Now, as holistic practitioners, we don't have a way to look inside the body. And so because of that, we can't call these bowel pockets or diverticuli. We're not allowed to do that. That is a diagnosis. These instead, we call them crypts. And what they suggest, they're very, very tiny closed lacunae that are dark. Now, the dark means that this might be a part of the body where it might be a little bit harder to affect a change within the body. There might be a greater risk of accumulating toxins in the area. There might be a lower energy in the area. So we may need to support that. Now, we've had a question come in on the webinar. I understand there's not much change in the iris, even if they were to switch to a healthy lifestyle, but is it possible for a client to get back their original eye color? I have never seen that happen in 40 years of practice. I have never seen people get their original eye color back. It's kind of like trying to get your original hair color back as you age. It's pretty much impossible, right? And so these are inherently programmed changes. Thank you for that question. That was a good question. Did I miss anything back here? I just need to come back to the last slide just to make sure I hit all the points I wanted to. Yes, I did. That was great. Okay. So autonomic nerve wreath versus Cholerate. You just heard me in that last slide talk about the crypts being inside the Cholerate. So what is the Cholerate? Let's have a look. This ring that is coming around here is the Cholerate. Now this in old language is called the autonomic nerve wreath. The reason we've changed the name is because this line, this fiber that comes around here gives us so much information, not just about the nervous system, not just about that autonomic nervous system, but it also teaches us about the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It teaches us about the tone, that inherent tone of the intestinal tract. And if this is pigmented, it gives us insight into what other organs want to have an impact on the nervous system and on the intestinal tract. So this is known as the Cholerate. Lymphatic rosary versus hydrogenoid subtype. All right, so if you're familiar with what a lymphatic rosary is on a church level, it's a string of beads that is used for a particular purpose. So this looks kind of like a rosary. We have these white blobs coming around the perimeter, roughly, of the iris. Now, the lymphatic rosary had the connotation that the lymphatic system was currently stagnant, that it needed cleansing, that it was dirty. And so what we now know is that's not true. These individually are called tophi. Together, collectively, they create what we call the hydrogenoid subtype. That they delineate, they teach us that there is a predisposition towards the lymphatic system being a little bit sluggish in how it circulates the lymphatic fluid. Knowing that, we may want to make certain recommendations, but we need to have a conversation with our client, because the lymphatic system is affected by nutrition, it's affected by lifestyle. If this client has a lot of dairy product, white flour, white sugar, foods that are not nutritious and that kind of create mucus, not kind of, but absolutely create mucus and acid in the body. If this person has a sedentary lifestyle, then this lymphatic rosary is showing us that they are going to end up with having a congested lymphatic system that is going to need some work. That work is going to be clean up the diet and get some exercise. If, on the other hand, this person has a clean diet, they're eating a lot of plant material, they're getting daily physical activity, they're not doing the refined foods that tend to create acid and gum us up, then this lymphatic rosary is simply an indicator that says, mind your manners, keep your diet clean, stay physically active, and your lymphatic system will continue to function well. Does that make sense? That it's an inherent marking, and we have to understand the client's symptoms and what the client is already doing to understand whether this marking is telling us there's a problem or whether this marking is suggesting a predisposition. All right, so now that you know what some of the modern constitutional language is, and why it is so much more meaningful in a clinical setting and useful in a clinical setting, if you are a holistic practitioner and you want to learn more about the upcoming course, Dynamic Iridology Assessment, yeah, I just messed that up. The Dynamic Iridology Assessment System, there we go. Then I'm inviting you to book a call with me. Let's have a conversation. You know, when you're signing up for a class, sometimes there's that little bit of fear and trepidation of, is this course really something that will be a benefit to me? Is it something I can do? Will it help me in my practice? And if that's where you're at, you're thinking, yeah, I work with nutrition, I work with herbs, I am a holistic professional, but I don't know if this course is really going to be good for me or not. If I'm ready for this course, book a call. Let's talk. If you're ready, I'll help you with that. If you're not ready, we'll shelve it until you are ready. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate that you've been with me. I hope you've learned something. I hope you found that helpful. And I look forward to seeing you in our next live on Wednesday. And I'm hoping that I'll be speaking with you on a call. Take good care, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.